I swear that Monday morning already felt strange, even before everything unraveled. I remember stuffing my suitcase while trying to shake off this little knot in my stomach, telling myself it was just work trip nerves. My husband kept pacing around the kitchen, acting overly cheerful, almost too eager for me to leave, which should have been my first red flag. But I brushed it off like I always did, telling myself he was just trying to be supportive. When I finally grabbed my bag and closed the door behind me, I genuinely thought I'd be gone for a full week and come back feeling accomplished. I had no idea life was about to flip on its head within a matter of hours. The airport was chaos the moment I stepped in. Crowds everywhere, the smell of burnt espresso hanging in the air, announcements echoing off the high ceilings like they were taunting us. I kept checking the clock, trying to convince myself everything would smooth out, but then that dull-sounding voice came through the speakers saying all flights for my route had been canceled. Just like that. No warning, no alternatives, nothing. People started yelling, others panicking, and I just stood there gripping my boarding pass until my fingers hurt. I felt this strange mix of frustration and relief, like the universe was dragging me home for some reason. I took the first cab I could find, sinking into the seat like all the energy had drained out of me. As we got closer to my street, the sky seemed darker than when I'd left, as if the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Then I saw it. A sleek black car parked right in front of my house, angled almost arrogantly across the curb. I'd never seen it before. Something in my chest tightened instantly, that instinctive dread that whispers, "Something's wrong." And even before I stepped out of the cab, I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears, warning me that whatever waited inside wasn't going to be good. The moment I unlocked the door, I felt it, this odd warmth inside the house, like someone had been moving around way too comfortably. The lights in the hallway were on, even though I'd made sure to turn everything off before leaving that morning. And then there was the smell. A heavy, sweet perfume that didn't belong to me, clinging to the air as if it had been sprayed just minutes earlier. I froze right there on the doormat, my hand still wrapped around the handle, my breath suddenly too shallow. I wasn't imagining it. Someone had been here. Someone was still here. I took a few steps forward, slow and careful, like the floor might collapse under me. That strange perfume mixed with the scent of my laundry detergent, creating this nauseating contrast that made my stomach churn. I could hear faint rustling upstairs, soft, rhythmic, almost like whispers. I remember swallowing hard, trying to convince myself it was the TV he forgot to turn off, or maybe the window I'd left open. But deep down, something in me already knew. My intuition wasn't just whispering anymore. It was screaming. Every step toward the staircase felt like I was walking into a nightmare I hadn't signed up for. Halfway up the stairs, the sound became unmistakable. Feminine giggles, light and careless, drifting from the direction of the bedroom I'd shared with him for years. My heart actually stopped for a second. I grabbed the railing because my knees suddenly felt weak, like they couldn't decide whether to hold me up or let me fall. The laughter grew louder, mingled with his voice, relaxed and playful in a way he hadn't been with me in months. Heat rushed through my body, not from embarrassment, but from this raw, rising fury. I stood at the top step, staring at the closed bedroom door, knowing that the second I touched that doorknob, nothing in my life would ever be the same again. I stood there, staring at the bedroom door, my fingertips trembling as they hovered just above the doorknob. For a split second, I actually hesitated, like opening that door would somehow make everything too real, too permanent. My breath came shallow, almost shaky, and I could feel my heartbeat thudding so hard it echoed in my ears. I thought about all the times I'd trusted him, defended him, believed him. And suddenly, those soft female whispers on the other side of the door felt like knives slicing through every memory we'd ever built. Still, I had to see. I had to know. The doorknob felt cold against my palm, painfully cold, like touching metal in the middle of winter. And when I finally turned it, the door creaked open just enough for the smell to hit me first. A mix of cheap perfume, sweat, and that unmistakable scent of betrayal. I pushed it wider, the hinges groaning as if even the house itself was trying to warn me. The laughter stopped instantly. The room fell silent except for the pounding in my chest. And for a heartbeat, everyone inside just froze. Him and the women sprawled around in various states of undress, like they'd been caught in some twisted tableau. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I just stood there, absorbing the scene in front of me with a kind of detached clarity, like my mind had stepped outside my body so it wouldn't shatter. And in that suspended moment, something inside me cracked, not quietly, not subtly, but loudly, violently. The betrayal wasn't just obvious, it was obscene. Everything they were doing, everything he had planned the minute I walked out of the house. All of it flooded me with a fury so sharp it made my hands curl into fists. And as the reality settled in, I felt the words rising in my throat, words that would explode out of me and change everything that came next. The scream tore out of me before I could even think, raw and shaking, echoing off the walls like it belonged to someone else. I heard myself demanding how he could possibly betray me so fast, saying he hadn't even waited for my plane to take off before hiring women to crawl into our bed. My voice cracked, but not from weakness, from the kind of disbelief that strips you bare. He scrambled upright, eyes wide, stuttering something about me not being supposed to come back so soon, as if that somehow made any of it less grotesque. I could barely see straight through the fury burning in my eyes. The women, clearly hired, started gathering their things with this clumsy urgency, not daring to look at me. One of them whispered an apology so soft it was swallowed by the tension in the room. And God, he had the nerve. He kept insisting it wasn't what it looked like, even though we were surrounded by tangled sheets, scattered clothing, and enough evidence to shame an entire city block. He said he'd been lonely, that it was just for fun, that I shouldn't ruin the night over a misunderstanding. Every word he spit out only made the bile rise higher in my throat. I remember stepping deeper into the room, pointing at the mess, my voice trembling with rage as I told him exactly what it looked like. A planned betrayal, a celebration of my absence, a humiliation he never expected me to witness. He tried reaching for me, tried saying we should talk calmly, but I jerked away so fast it made him flinch. I wasn't about to let him twist things into something smaller, something forgivable. Not when the truth was sprawled across my own bed. Not when I could still hear their laughter ringing in my ears like a taunt. The anger took over me in a way I'd never felt before, like something ancient and primal waking up inside my chest. I marched straight to his side of the closet, yanking drawers open so violently that the handles rattled. Every shirt, every pair of pants, every pathetic souvenir he ever brought home from those business trips he swore were exhausting. I grabbed them all. He kept telling me to stop, saying it wasn't fair, that I was overreacting, that neighbors might see. As if his biggest fear was embarrassment, not the fact that I had just watched him desecrate the home I built with him. I dragged armfuls of his belongings through the hallway, my vision swimming with rage, my breath sharp like needles in my lungs. He followed me, pleading now, saying he never meant to hurt me, saying it was a mistake, saying we could fix it if I just calmed down. But every word sounded like poison. Sweetened lies he probably practiced for moments just like this. I flung the front door open, and the wind hit my face like a slap, grounding me just enough to keep going. I hurled the first load of his clothes onto the porch, watching fabric scatter across the lawn. He tried grabbing my arm then, not roughly, but desperately, like he suddenly realized I wasn't bluffing, like he finally understood what losing me meant. I pulled away so quickly he stumbled. I told him he'd thrown away the right to touch me the moment he invited strangers into our bed. The hired women stood awkwardly by the door, clutching their bags, eyes lowered, ready to flee the scene like it was a burning building. And honestly, that's what it felt like. Smoke everywhere, alarms blaring, everything collapsing. I didn't care. I stepped back inside to grab the rest, knowing I wasn't done yet. I stormed back into the bedroom one last time, grabbing whatever else belonged to him. His shoes lined neatly beneath the bed, his favorite jacket hanging behind the door, even the stupid watch he always bragged about. My hands moved on their own, fueled by a pulse of betrayal that throbbed behind my ribs. I didn't care about the mess, or the noise, or the fact that my whole world was spinning so fast it made me dizzy. All I cared about was removing every trace of him from the space he had stained. It felt like the only way to breathe again. By the time I got to the front yard with the last load, the scene looked almost surreal. His clothes scattered across the grass, the women hurrying down the sidewalk without looking back, and him standing there with his hands in his hair, muttering that I was ruining everything. He said I was throwing away our marriage over a single mistake, as if he hadn't orchestrated an entire night of betrayal the moment I walked out for work. Hearing him say that, hearing the entitlement in his voice, pushed something in me past a point of no return. I told him to leave. Not softly, not hesitantly, firmly, with a certainty I didn't even know I had until that moment. I said he'd crossed a line he could never walk back from, that what he'd done had burned every bridge between us to ashes. He tried to speak again, but the words died when I pointed toward the street. Slowly, reluctantly, he walked away, stepping over his own clothes like they were casualties of a war he started. When the door finally shut behind him, the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath with me, waiting for whatever came next. The next morning, the house felt like a battlefield after the smoke clears. Quiet, still, but bruised in every corner. I woke up with my throat tight and my eyes burning, the kind of exhaustion that comes from crying more than sleeping. When I walked past the bedroom, I stopped in the doorway, staring at the sheets I had ripped apart in my fury. The perfume from those women still clung to the air, sickly sweet, like it was mocking me. I stood there for a long minute, swallowing the bitterness rising in my chest, wondering how someone I loved could turn our home into something so unrecognizable overnight. Cleaning became my only way to keep from collapsing. I stripped the bed until the mattress was bare, tossing everything into garbage bags with a force that made my arms ache. Every drawer I opened smelled like him, like us, like memories that suddenly tasted rotten. I wiped surfaces that didn't need wiping, scrubbed floors that were already clean. Anything to distract myself from the hollow ache opening up inside me. At one point, I caught my reflection in the window. Swollen eyes, messy hair, a haunted expression. I barely recognized myself, and that was somehow even more painful than the betrayal. The first neighbor I saw was Mrs. Clark, across the street, watering her roses like she always did. Normally she'd wave, smile, ask about my week. But that morning she stiffened when she saw me, her eyes widening just a second before she looked away. I felt this strange prickle down my spine, like she knew something I wasn't supposed to. I tried to shake it off, blaming it on my raw nerves, but the longer I stood outside, the more I felt a quiet weight in the air. People weren't just avoiding me. They were avoiding the truth I hadn't discovered yet. Later that afternoon, as I carried a bag of trash to the curb, I caught two neighbors whispering near the mailbox. They stopped the second they noticed me, their faces shifting into those stiff, polite smiles people wear when they've been caught gossiping. One of them forced out a rough day, huh? But her eyes slid toward my house with a guilty flicker that made my stomach twist. Something wasn't right. Their discomfort wasn't pity, it was recognition. The kind that comes from knowing a secret long before the person living it does. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself I was just imagining things after everything I'd been through. but the signs kept piling up. The way Mr. Thompson hurried inside when he saw me walking up the street, the way a couple of teenagers from 2 doors down exchanged looks before whispering to each other as I passed by. It felt like the whole neighborhood was suddenly speaking a language I couldn't understand, one where I was the punchline. A sick heat spread through my chest, the same way it does right before you break down, only this time it wasn't heartbreak. It was something sharper. The truth finally slipped out in the most accidental way possible. I was talking to my neighbor Julia, someone I'd always trusted, trying to distract myself with small talk, when she sighed and said, I always hoped you'd find out in a gentler way. My heart stumbled, and when I asked her what she meant, she froze, eyes widening like she'd dropped something precious. She tried to backtrack, saying she shouldn't get involved, but the damage was already done. I could feel the world tilting beneath me again, only this time the betrayal wasn't just from him. It was from every single person who had watched it happen. I pressed Julia gently but firmly, my voice low, almost too calm for the storm brewing inside me. She shifted from foot to foot, twisting her fingers together, and finally admitted that my husband had been bringing women over for months, always when I was traveling for work, always at night, always through the back door. She said the whole street kind of figured I knew, as if my silence had been a choice, not ignorance. The words hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation stretched out over time, observed, whispered about, tolerated. As I walked back toward my house, every window I passed felt like an eye watching me. I could practically hear the gossip echoing in the quiet evening air, the same whispers that had filled the neighborhood while I lived my life blissfully unaware. The betrayal spread wider and wider the more I thought about it. Not just him lying to my face, but everyone choosing their own comfort over my truth. They had smiled at me, accepted my holiday cookies, complimented my garden, all while knowing I was going home to someone who saw me as nothing more than a placeholder. By the time I closed the door behind me, a new kind of silence settled over the house, colder, heavier, almost metallic. And beneath the ache, beneath the anger, something else began to take shape. A resolve, sharp and steady, forming like a blade being forged in fire. If my husband thought he could betray me unnoticed, and if my neighbors thought they could stand by and watch, then they clearly had no idea who I became the moment I saw those women in my bedroom. I stood in the hallway, breathing slowly, already planning what the next days would look like, and whom they would expose. The next morning, I woke up different, still hurt, still raw, but steadier somehow, like the chaos had finally burned itself into clarity. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that tasted stronger than usual, staring at the steam as if it held instructions. And maybe it did, because the longer I sat there, the more a cold, focused determination began to bloom in my chest. I wasn't going to crumble. I wasn't going to hide. If my husband and my neighbors wanted to treat me like a fool, then I'd show them exactly how foolish that assumption was. I started by gathering evidence, every receipt he left behind, every message still synced to the old tablet he forgot I had access to, every timestamp on the security camera he assumed I never checked. I dug through drawers, closets, emails, piecing together the nights and the lies he thought he'd buried. And the more I found, the calmer I became. Like each discovery sharpened my focus. The betrayal was deeper than I imagined, but so was my resolve. I wasn't just preparing to confront him. I was preparing to dismantle the entire facade he'd built. When I stepped outside later that day, the neighborhood went quiet. Too quiet. People paused mid-conversation, glanced at me, then looked away like I was a storm cloud drifting their way. And maybe I was. I walked straight to the HOA president's house, and when he opened the door, his expression flickered with guilt before settling into forced politeness. Without raising my voice, I told him what I knew, that he had seen the women coming and going, that he had chosen silence over decency, that he'd been complicit. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Good. Let them all feel a fraction of what I felt. After leaving the HOA president looking rattled on his own doorstep, I felt a strange, steady calm settle over me, like every step I took was part of a plan I hadn't even needed to write down. I headed straight back home, gathered all the evidence into neat, labeled folders, and sent them exactly where they would hurt him the most. His workplace received a detailed report outlining his behavior during my work trips, complete with dates and proof he'd been entertaining hired company while I was out earning our income. I didn't need revenge that was messy. I wanted revenge that was undeniable. Then I contacted the landlord of the apartment he'd rushed to after I threw him out. I laid everything out politely, almost sweetly, explaining the kind of traffic he brought to residential properties, how often he invited groups of women late at night, how disrespectful he was to community rules. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse, I simply informed. And the landlord listened. I heard his tone shift, heard the displeasure brewing on the other end of the line. Actions have consequences, and my husband was finally about to taste a few he couldn't talk his way out of. Later that evening, I invited the neighbors to a small gathering at my house. Nothing dramatic, just a casual, "Come by, we need to talk" message dropped discreetly into each mailbox. I wanted them to stand in the house they allowed to become a stage for humiliation. And when they arrived, hesitant, stiff, clearly bracing for something, they found me composed, calm, and very, very clear. I didn't point fingers. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told them how disappointed I was that an entire street chose convenience over honesty. And watching their faces shift, from denial to shame to discomfort, was the first time in days that I felt something close to power. When the neighbors finally filtered out of my living room, their murmured apologies hanging weakly in the air, I closed the door and felt a quiet click inside me, like the final piece of something falling into place. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stood there, breathing in the scent of my own home, reclaiming a space they had all watched be contaminated. Then I went to my desk, pulled out the stack of letters I had written the night before, and began sealing each envelope one by one. Inside each one, a simple, factual account of what they had seen, what they had chosen to ignore, and what it cost me. No accusations, no insults, just truth. The next morning, I walked down the street depositing each letter into the corresponding mailbox, feeling the cold air sting my cheeks in a strangely invigorating way. The sun wasn't even fully up yet, and the neighborhood was wrapped in that blue-gray quiet that comes right before dawn. It made the act feel ceremonial, almost symbolic, like returning something they had all dropped at my doorstep without permission. By the time I reached the last house, I felt lighter, somehow taller, as if the simple act of naming their silence out loud had peeled something heavy off my skin. Hours later, as people collected their mail, I watched from my kitchen window. Shocked expressions, embarrassed glances, whispered conversations that didn't dare rise above a murmur. Some looked toward my house and quickly looked away, now suddenly aware that I wasn't the naive, oblivious wife they once pitied. My revenge wasn't loud, but it echoed. And as I leaned against the counter, hands wrapped around a warm mug, I realized this wasn't about punishing them. Not anymore. It was about reclaiming myself, piece by piece, and I could feel, deep in my bones, that I wasn't done rising yet. The next few days were strangely quiet, almost unnervingly so. When I stepped outside to water my plants or check the mail, neighbors who once waved eagerly now avoided my eyes, pretending to be fascinated by their hedges or car doors. A few offered stiff, hesitant smiles, but most just froze, unsure whether to greet me or hide. And honestly, for the first time, their discomfort didn't sting. It felt deserved. I carried myself differently too. Shoulders back, steps steady, no longer shrinking into the version of me who used to apologize for taking up space. Then came the moment I knew would happen sooner or later. He showed up. He stood on my porch looking small, smaller than I'd ever seen him, with dark circles under his eyes and that familiar nervous twitch in his jaw. He said he'd been confused, that he'd made the worst mistake of his life, and that he wanted to fix us. He said it was for me to remember our good years, that we had history, that I shouldn't throw everything away over a moment of weakness. Hearing him say those words made something inside me go cold, like a door slamming shut. I told him calmly, so calmly it startled him, that he hadn't destroyed our marriage in a single night. He had been tearing it apart piece by piece while I was traveling for work, trusting him to hold down the home we both built. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let anger speak for me. I simply stated the truth, that he had broken something he could never rebuild because he never valued it in the first place. He blinked at me like he didn't recognize who I'd become, and maybe he didn't. Maybe that was the clearest sign that I was finally stepping into someone stronger. After he left, defeated, shoulders slumped, mumbling something about hoping I'd come to my senses, the house felt lighter, as if it had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. I walked through each room slowly, noticing the tiny changes I'd made over the past few days. New sheets, rearranged furniture, fresh flowers on the table. Small things, really, but they added up to something bigger. For the first time in a long time, the space felt like mine again, not a stage for his lies. And as I ran my hand along the back of the couch, I felt this warm, steady certainty blooming inside me. I wasn't going back. My routine shifted in ways that surprised me. I woke up earlier, brewed coffee for myself without rushing, sat by the window just to feel the morning sun. I started working out in the living room, cooking meals I actually enjoyed, playing music he always claimed was too emotional. I found myself humming, even smiling at random moments, like my soul was stretching after being cramped for too long. And every day, the ache inside me softened, replaced by something gentler, something like freedom. Not the sudden, reckless kind, but the quiet, earned kind. Neighbors began approaching me again, but this time with a different tone. Some offered awkward apologies. Others tried making small talk as if nothing had happened. A few simply nodded with a look that said they finally respected me, or feared me, or both. I didn't chase their approval, and I didn't let their guilt shape my days. I kept my focus on rebuilding, not for them, but for myself. And the more I invested in my own peace, the clearer it became that I wasn't just healing, I was transforming. One evening, as I was lighting a candle in the living room, I caught my reflection in the mirror above the fireplace. And for a moment, I just stood there, studying myself. My eyes looked clearer, sharper somehow. My posture was different too, less guarded, more grounded. I looked like a woman who had crawled through fire but refused to come out burned. And strangely, that realization made my throat tighten with something closer to pride than pain. I'd survived something brutal, something humiliating, something that could have broken me. But it didn't. It remade me. That night, I curled up on the couch with a blanket and let myself breathe, really breathe, for what felt like the first time in months. I didn't think about him, or the neighbors, or the betrayal that had once consumed me. Instead, I thought about who I was becoming. Someone who didn't shrink herself to keep others comfortable. Someone who didn't ignore her own intuition. Someone who no longer needed to beg for loyalty from people unworthy of offering it. The silence around me wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful, like a fresh start waiting for me to claim it. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I paused in the hallway, feeling the weight of everything I'd endured. and everything I'd risen above. The house felt different, warmer, safer, almost protective. And deep inside, I could sense that this chapter of my life was closing, not in despair, but in quiet triumph. I didn't know what the future would look like yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt curious instead of afraid. I was ready for whatever came next, not because I trusted others, but because I finally trusted myself.